Welcome to the first episode of the Fenway Rundown podcast this week. I'm Sean McAdam. My usual co-host, Chris Cotillo, is taking a few days off. He will not be joining us today, but we will be joined by Will Flemming, one of the main Red Sox play-by-play voices on WEEI over the Red Sox radio network, talking a little bit about what's going on with the Red Sox and about the broadcasting business and his longtime friendship and partnership and work relationship with Joe Castiglione. We think you're going to enjoy that. We also think that you will enjoy being a part of the Insider Text program, where you can get all the information on the Red Sox, all the breaking news, an opportunity to ask questions of myself, of Chris Smith, of Chris Cotillo, and a chance to submit questions for future mailbag editions of the Fenway Rundown. And to do that, all you have to do is text the word join to 617-751-6257, then click the link to subscribe. It's free for 14 days, and then it's $4.99 a month. We think you'll enjoy that. And without further ado, Will Flemming. As we said, it's our first episode this week of the Fenway Rundown. My usual co-host, Chris Cotillo's off for a few days, but we are happy to welcome in one of the Red Sox radio voices, Will Flemming from WEEI. Will, thanks for joining us and good morning.
Sean, I'm glad I just get you. This is the way it should be on Fenway Rundown. I appreciate it. It's been a long time coming. I love your guys' show, so thanks for having me on.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you. Let's talk about the season, which is now coming up on, I think, 7 weeks, coming up on almost 2 months. And to date, certainly a surprising season in a good way for the Red Sox. I think if you had been given the list of injuries that were going to hit this club, starting with Lucas Giolito, continuing with Trevor Story, Tristan Casas, and then 60% of the remaining rotation, and said the Red Sox would be around 500 as we got into mid-May. I think not only fans, but maybe a lot of people in the organization would have rushed to sign up for such a record, given all they've dealt with.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Sean. I mean, we all left Florida saying, what is going to happen with this starting rotation? It's probably, in hindsight, was a little lazy of me and all of us to say, well, they need somebody like Montgomery or Snell. But it sure felt like they were thin in the rotation. But what none of us could have known is what was going on behind the scenes. And you were down there. You saw Alex Cora. And Alex is like the worst poker player in the world. He's a brilliant baseball mind and manager, but he tends to tip his hand about things he's feeling and seeing. And he said over and over again to anybody who would listen, not in a joking manner, like, this pitching thing is real and totally different. And he had that pegged. I doubt he figured that Cooper Criswell would win his first 5 starts and that, Tanner Houck would be basically the best pitcher in the American League. But I'm sure there were some signs of both of those things. So I would say, as we continue in this transitional period, for lack of a better word, with the Red Sox organizationally trying to figure out who they are, what they want to be in the short and long term, that one thing, the pitching side of it, is the most important development of the last couple of months, because you've been watching around the game, whether it's the Rays, the Guardians, the Braves for one, the Dodgers, these certain organizations that do win over and over again, in addition to having star talent and great international development programs, they have kind of unlocked this secret sauce to what's going on in the pitching world. And it's pretty obvious that with Craig and Andrew Bailey and Justin Willard, they do have their own vision of this that is certainly operating at a very high level. I mean, let's wait how it goes for a season or 2 or 3, especially, I think, with injuries and whether or not the league adjusts to the amount of spin the Red Sox are throwing. But you just can't argue with the results right now. And that is so encouraging. And that does put the organization, I think, in a position to be even more aggressive, not only at the deadline this year, but going forward. This notion that you and as an organization can go out and more than ever before identify traits in pitchers that other teams don't necessarily see and then mold them into something they've never been before. I mean, it keeps costs down in terms of you don't have to go out and spend $35 million on a starting pitcher. And it just gives you an inherent edge to improve the guys you have and identify future targets. So, yeah, I mean, I'm totally surprised with that part of the season. And it is the only reason they are where they are.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. Offensively, they have struggled, as you might expect them to, without Story and Casas taking up two important parts in the first 4 or 5 spots in the order. Early in the season, they had their defensive struggles. Lord knows those have gotten better. It's been cleaned up a little bit, in large part probably because of Rafaela stabilizing shortstop and in turn improving the entire infield defense. But it has been all about pitching, and you're right. I think the question is, how sustainable is that? We've heard a lot about more breaking balls, more off speed, fewer fourth seamers. What else have you noticed about, for lack of a better term, the new pitching, excuse me, the new pitching program implemented by Breslow and Bailey? From your vantage point, what's different other than the results and what we've already talked about?
Yeah, I mean, so there's things that are both big and small that have been different. Little ones, for example, Andrew started to talk about how they tweak minor parts of the schedule to maximize performance, right? Like he told me on our first road trip, I'd asked him, why is Garrett Whitlock throwing after all these games? That just doesn't, he never used to do that. Well, they've changed the schedule because that's what Andrew Bailey does. I mean, he is so in the weeds with all this stuff. He wants to identify every marginal opportunity for, excellence. And he realized that on a day game, what sense does it make to have a starter on a day he's supposed to throw a bullpen, get up at 9 a.m., kind of go through it at 70% at 10 a.m., and then, go back into the clubhouse and wait. He wants his pitchers to be at their best at 7 p.m. So every single thing about the program is geared and triggered for that. So, I love that they do that, right? Like that with each individual pitcher, there's a specific plan for each person. That part makes too much sense to have not done for years gone by. And then, the other big thing is we've been hearing from Tampa these last couple of years, remember the 92, remember the 95, these first pitch strikes, how infrequently bad things happen to the pitcher. And I talked to Chaim Bloom about this for 2 years because he was, for lack of a better word, kind of a zealot for that down in Tampa. And he wanted, whether through Dave Bush or his pitching staff, like, guys, we have to throw first pitch strikes and better first pitch strikes. And he had a hard time convincing and getting buy-in on that. Well, here come Craig and Andrew Bailey. And that's the number one thing that has changed. And if you look at all of the outcomes across baseball, I mean, it's staggering. Everybody talks about, that 1-1 pitch and how, the slug and the outcomes change so dramatically based on whether it's a ball or a strike. Well, it's really the first pitch right there with it. And you just watch these guys. They over and over again are in 0-1 counts. Like, it's not a coincidence that Chris Martin had one of the best seasons of any reliever in baseball last year because he threw more first pitch strikes than anybody else. And they weren't just right down the middle fastball. It's on the black. So, I mean, overall, everybody knows what the Red Sox are attempting to do, but to watch it in practice, like the fact that Bayo has not thrown a four-seam fastball all season long, yeah, that speaks to this idea of we want to spin it more and throw more fastballs. But Cutter Crawford throws fastballs. Tanner Houck throws a lot of fastballs, and they're not four-seamers per se, but it's more about – I love the idea of if you have a pitch that's not elite, we're not throwing it. Right. Like, there's just no reason to be married to some old school philosophy of, well, you got to have it. Now, I think, Sean, and maybe as we get into the third and fourth month of the season, what could be really interesting to me is to counteract the ability for teams to adjust and adapt and change their approach. Like, wouldn't it be fun to see if every once in a while, Bayo and Houck just flashed a four-seam fastball at the top of the zone to prove to a hitter, I still got that in there. You still have to
keep them
it
off
in the
balance
report
a little bit and not get too predictable. That only makes sense. And I think you're right. It's going to be fascinating once they go through the league a time or two, whether opposing teams adjust and then it's the Red Sox turn to adjust again. And what do Breslow and Bailey have up on their sleeves? But I think you're right when you talk about Heimblum wanting to do some of these things and not getting maybe the cooperation or the follow through. Part of Bailey's appeal, it seems to me, is his ability to connect to people and get them to buy in with what he's selling. You can give these guys an avalanche of data. You can point to all sorts of things that are supposed to make them better. But if they don't believe uh, in your conviction and make that their own, then you're talking to a wall. But Bailey obviously has married the knowledge and the data and the science to a human element where people trust what he's saying and say, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And when it succeeds, it only reinforces the whole process.
Yeah, I think that's right. And anybody who's been around him can see why that works. I mean, it's why, most pitching coaches don't become managers, but you can understand why there's starting to be some rumblings about that because I think, we've had now for a couple decades the wave of player managers. The guy who can say, I was in a clubhouse, I was in your shoes, I can relate to this. And there is something to getting more, buy-in from that. It doesn't happen quite as often on the pitching side. And, Andrew is so personable. He's so energetic. Like you hear Tanner and Garrett and all these guys talk about him. That's one of the things that stands out the most to them is the energy and passion with which he approaches this thing. And, as someone who's on the road with the team a lot, there has not been one time, not one, when I get up to go, whatever it is, take a walk, play golf, I'm leaving the hotel at 7:30. He is in the hotel lobby or coffee shop almost every day working on stuff. He's doing Zooms with the whole pitching department. So I think there's that element too, where the players see if this guy's putting in this much time, then, it's much easier for me to trust him and buy into that. And then the last thing I'd say about it, Sean, is the competition side of it. I loved what they did in spring training to introduce these little games, even in simulated spots, in bullpens, whatever you're doing. Like, we're going to compete. Who's going to throw the best in most first pitch strikes? Who's going to get out of these jams the best? And they've continued to do that. So I just think raising the bar of competitive intensity is a real one of his strengths. And clearly the guys love every angle of that.
7 weeks into the season is a little early to be planning for the duck boats to roll through Boston in October. There's a long way to go. It's a tough division, we know. But have you sensed, talk about buy-in, in your interaction with fans, whether it be on social media, going to the ballpark, out during the day, have you sensed that fans are starting to say, okay, this is kind of interesting. We know that it was an unhappy fan base in the offseason with the reduced payroll, not going after some obvious free agent pitching targets. And again, we don't want to get too giddy over being, a game over 500 or at 500 here in May, but they have survived a really rough stretch, and it looks like there's a long-term program in place. Are you starting to see some buy-in from the fans?
Not really. I mean, I sort of view it like a political election in a way where, these things are determined by 30,000 people in 5 states. To me, that's the difference between whether Fenway is rocking and a great place to go see a ball game. It's always going to be a beautiful, museum, a marvelous place to sit and spend 3 hours, or whether it's more of kind of like a tourist experience. It's those people on the margins that have for 50 years adored the Red Sox and been involved and into it intensely. And I don't feel that right now. I certainly, plenty of people say to me, this has been really impressive and might be on to something. And they love the bottom line results that have been better than people expected. But, like, you have to be blind to not look around at 645 at Fenway Park and see that there are 10,000 empty seats most nights, and they fill in. I mean, people come in, and the Red Sox have not played well enough yet at Fenway to have it really rocking like it can and always has. I just think there has been now for some time, the messaging to the fan base is not now. Like we're going to try to compete. We're doing everything we can, but we're still very much in a transitional period. And I just think that people have sort of taken that advice and said, all right, well,
I'll
I'm
be
in
back
wait
when
and
it
see
gets
mode.
good.
Yeah. And the other thing is like, the hope is like the Casas injury on so many levels is the biggest thing that's happened to this team. Yeah, Trevor Story's defense was stabilizing the whole club. Tristan, I thought, was going to have a 40 home run season. He looked like he was really in that lane to make an enormous leap, and I think that'll happen if and when he comes back for another full season this or next year. But the thing about Casas, in addition to the outright production, is he has become now the guy that I think most fans identify as kind of, other than Devers, the face of the franchise. And he's more accessible. He's more giving himself. The language barrier is a part of that. Like we go to all these other towns, like we were just in Atlanta. It's like the lineup is one star after the next. And everybody's got Albies jerseys and Acuna and Riley and even Murphy and Darno. Like they've known these players for a long time and they've won as a group. And I think that's the next step. Like you need Casas to do it. I think Rafaela's got a chance to be one of those people. But then it really is, again, this wave of Meyer and Anthony and Teal to get a core of identifiable players. Because, Boston is a star-driven town, period, bottom line, end of story. And I think for a few years now, again, as the Red Sox have changed the front office and done a lot of things, we get why maybe it's not as star-laden as it has been at times. But I think that's harder to show up to a ballpark when you look at the lineup card and you don't know 8 of the people on it. That's just a harder sell for fans. And the Red Sox organizationally, obviously, for decades have been a star-driven group. So I think that's the biggest part of it. Like, can Houck become that guy? Because there are nights now where he feels like Pedro and Roger Clemens. Like, can he become an absolute star on the mound? I believe so.
Yeah, kind of appointment viewing, right? From a pitching standpoint, where you
need reasons to turn
circle
it on
your calendar. This is a Pedro day, and are we going to get to that level with Tanner Houck as a guy that you want to make sure you are in front of your TV or listening on the radio at 7:05 or 7:10 because Tanner Houck is pitching that night?
That's right. And I just think, I firmly believe that the Red Sox organizationally, they're trying to build this thing from within, which is the right way to go. Look, the Dodgers didn't make splashes like they did for Mookie and Freddie Freeman forever until they did what the Red Sox are in the process of doing right now. And that is build from the bottom up. I have some quibbles with the reluctance to do some things on the margins that I think could help. Like we've seen teams win 88 games, get in and win the World Series. I would personally push a little bit harder toward that rather than wait for everything to come up and be perfect until you make big splashes. But look, they did make a $300 million plus offer to Yamamoto. They've been active with other people. They're just picking their spots for now in that way. But I do believe completely that once this thing gets really humming, and that depends, Sean, like if Marcelo Meyer is up in September and looks the part, which, the early returns are so good so far in Portland. If he's up, if Casas is back and healthy, if Houck has really emerged as an ace-type guy, Cutter Crawford continues to do that, well then, they're going to do what they've done for decades. I really think they are. They're going to go be active. Like next year's pitching class, although guys may start to sign off with their own teams, it's going to be an elite class for 2 years coming. So I think they'll do what they've done forever. And once that happens, I fully expect the fan base to come all the way back.
So we've talked a little bit about what's going on the field, what's new, what's different, what's changing. From your standpoint, what's different in 2024 about your end of the business, the broadcast end of things? Media is changing constantly. There are different ways to consume everything. We know that has changed a great deal in the last decade, changes almost all the time. What's different? You've done this a while. What's different about your job in 2024?
Man, I would like to think that at its core, fundamentally, not much is. It's an interesting question you raised, Sean, because I've always sort of believed that your main job is always going to be your main job. But in my work, like, you need to write great columns and stories that interest people, and you need to use words well and find compelling angles to write about. For me, at the end of the day, the fundamental things that define whether or not people receive me well, or that I can sleep at night about having done a good broadcast, those don't really change. You got to be able to tell stories, know the main, through lines of a game, get in and out of big moments, be conversational, interesting, and entertaining, right? I always have that thing in the back of my mind of like, all right, somebody is in a gunkwit, somebody's down the Cape, they've got
Why'd you pick a
Bud Light
gunkwit?
in their hand. Why would I ever go in that direction, right? They're driving around in their car as a truck driver. So many of those we hear from. I try every night to, at its core level, that's the job. I mean, transmit the story of that day's game in an entertaining way to those people. Do things that are discussed in the game change? Sure. Like, I think there is a little bit more of an appetite for the advanced numbers, the analytics. We have so much more data now that, like, I don't think it's that important or interesting to talk too much about analytics on an actual broadcast or a telecast, except for, like, we had all this advanced batted ball stuff come out for the first time yesterday on Baseball Savant, like the speed of the bat through the zone, quality of contact, how often somebody finds the sweet spot in the barrel of the bat. Like, that, to me, those kinds of things. I don't need to be talking ex-Wobacon. There are broadcasters who come into our booth and talk about weighted runs created plus, like, in a very serious way. And I don't say this out loud, but I mean, that would never in a billion years on our air come out of my mouth. It just, like, that doesn't interest anybody. Is it important for a front office to understand it? Yeah, of course it is. And for me to be conversive in it, yeah, sure, but not in the actual rhythms of a game. But I think I guess the main thing that changes is as the audience does evolve a little bit. I don't think it's about the things they want to hear necessarily as far as like advanced numbers go, but our audience trends a little bit younger more and more. And if you think about the people who are now in their 40s and 50s, like I am, they grew up in a time where there was more access to more information. And they want it done just a slightly different way, a little bit more than just the balls and strikes, and give a little bit more of yourself, because they've grown up in the Twitter, not necessarily I'm not the TikTok generation, but people are on their phones and they got access to all this different content nowadays, that if you can give a little bit more of yourself in that way, I think that's a positive. But look, Sean, I've always thought that my number one responsibility is to tell people things that they would not know, that they cannot read in a newspaper, that they can't get online, that they just don't hear on sports talk radio. I want to share with people, whether that's me pulling it out of Lou or Joe, my partners, memories of the past, or what it's like to be in the box against some of these people, or most importantly, things that I've seen and heard that day at the ballpark. I just think that's the most essential thing that I can do on any given day. It's why I'm not sitting in front of my scorecard every day, for 4 hours writing a bunch of stuff down that I think I have to get into a game. That's just not the way I want to do it. I don't think that's ever going to change. And what's cool about this younger wave, whether it's Casas or Rafaela or Abreu, like, they're more into this stuff. You've had a lot of these guys on your podcast. They want to talk about their personal lives. They do it on their own feeds. And that part is fun. Not that I'm necessarily going to be breaking down Brian Bayo's Instagram feed on a broadcast, but you get my point, where there's more windows to get into the personality of people. And I think to the extent we can do that for our fans, that's a really positive thing.
You talked about trying to find that connective thread, balancing maybe entertainment and education, letting people know what's going on. You're their eyes and ears at the ballpark. This is the second year now of the pitch clock. In fact, it's sped up some this year from 20 to 18 with runners on base, 20 to 18 seconds. I know that was an adjustment for you last year. Does it feel more comfortable with a year under your belt and with your partners?
It does. It does. I think like anything else, we've adapted to it. You just got to pick your spots more. I'm not telling many stories when Cooper Criswell's on the mound. I mean, it is literally like ball two, the pitch. It's a crazy thing, and that it's interesting because I work with two very different people the majority of the time. Joe and I have this wonderful friendship and chemistry, but by and large, we let the play-by-play person do the majority of the talking in an inning, and in that way, it allows that person more time to tell stories and to expand in the pitch clock era. But when I'm with Lou, I mean, I think it's such a gift that we have Lou on radio and television. My objective almost every night I've got him is to shut up and let him talk, and just kind of get out of the way and tell our fans what he's seeing. And so that part of it, in a way, when I'm with Lou, it becomes almost like a TV call. I mean, I'm almost just kind of doing the nuts and bolts. And of course, I mean, he and I can complete each other's sentences now. We've talked so much before the ball game. I know what things he's thinking about, what he's seeing. So obviously, in subtle ways and not so subtle ways, I lead him toward things that I've heard him say that I think will be interesting. And you just have to be more economical about that in this new era. And yet still the most important thing is being ready for each pitch, because you just never know. And the last thing you can do is be blathering on about something, trying to squeeze in a point or a story when the fan can hear the crack of the bat and something big is happening on the field. So yes, it's gotten much easier and much more comfortable. You got to pick your spots. And I think we've gotten better at that.
You talked about a lot about working with Lou Merloni as a former player. You also mentioned Joe Castiglione, and this is a special year for Joe. As we know, he over the winter was named the winner of the Ford Frick Award. He'll be honored in Cooperstown coming up in July, going into the broadcast wing of the Hall of Fame. That's going to be a great experience for him. He was on the ballot previously a few times, didn't make it, and then found out in December that he was the winner of the award. What's your relationship like with him, both on and off the air?
Well, he's the godfather for my son, my second son. So that gives you some insight into, how much I care about him, what he's meant to me. That really started at the very beginning, Sean. My first game was July 30th in 2018. And I was driving home from my minor league game that night, and I had a missed call from a 617 number that I'd never seen before. Long 90-second message, and it was Joe. He'd heard that day. I was doing the game the next day, and he essentially said, I'm so excited you're going to do this. We're going to make it work for you, and you'll be comfortable, and it'll be so much fun. It's like, most people in his shoes at that time, he'd done 37 years, don't do that. And I'll never forget, I'd worked so hard and so long, Sean, to be in that chair at Fenway Park that day. So I felt like I was not going to be overwhelmed by it and intimidated. And then it's 6:58 and I'm going, oh shit. These are about to be the most important 3 hours of your life. They are. Yep. And you just try to block that off for a while, because you can't function if you're just thinking about it in that way. And so I was nervous reading the starting lineups. And then Joe brought me in and asked me something. And I said, some dopey anecdote about Sandy Leon, about his time, with me in the minor leagues. And he reacted to it. And after 5 minutes, we were like old friends. And that's really been the way it's felt from the very beginning, both on air and off air. I have to do the lion's share of the kayak pedaling and paddling when we're out in the waters of Tampa Bay. And I probably drive the rental car more than he does. He has just been so generous on and off the air. I mean, he'll tell anybody to listen that he thinks I should be in that booth for a long time. If anybody in other markets calls and asks him, I mean, I've heard secondhand the kinds of things that he has said about me. And, one thing that this year has been really fun for me, Sean, is that, I mean, look, we all know the guy that Joe is, the place he holds in New England. So many people, we'll be in elevators and he'll say something, and people just turn and go, oh my God, that voice. And it takes them to all of these great moments, whether it's the Folk ground ball, whatever it is. So he's nailed those. He occupies that place in our sporting and cultural landscape. But he is the ultimate Red Sox historian. You can name any guy from the last 50 years, and he can tell you 10 different things about him and what his mom did for a living. And, you know, I'm seeing his father in Kansas City on a Tuesday when there was a rain delay, right? Like, that part of it is great too. And I think what that leads to, the thing that has stood out this year to me, has been the outpouring from former players and how many of them are going to Cooperstown to honor him and to celebrate with him. You know, I mean, obviously, I've heard all the stories of Johnny Pesky hitting his kids ground balls and Pedro Martinez giving his son his security detail in the Dominican, and, you know, all of these things, teaching his daughters Spanish. And then you see the back end of that, the love and the appreciation. And that's something that I really have taken to heart, Sean, because, you know, you've listened to me enough to know that I think in our market, you got to be fair and tell it like it is. And Joe does that, but there's a way to do that without making it personal. You know, it's about the play, not the player. Right. And I think most people understand that. And once you do that and invest the time and conversation and energy in people, then I think the reward on the flip side of that is more rich than you could possibly imagine. So that's something I really aspire to, is to have that kind of relate. The modern player is a little different than Johnny Pesky. You and I both know that. But be that as it may, I think that's a really good aspiration for all of us to have that kind of relationship with all the people you work with. But I'm very quietly trying to do everything I can to get to Cooperstown. Like, I came into the season, we're at Dodger Stadium when he's there, and I was like, that's the worst possible thing. And then April came and the calendar turned to May, and I thought to myself, what are you talking about? Yep. Like, this is there'll be other trips
to Dodger Stadium.
Yes, and more than that, like, who cares if it's hard to get somebody else out there? Let's go. I mean, yep. Your partner, your first major league partner, one of your best friends in the world, is going into the Hall of Fame. You got to be there. So I'm working hard on that, and it's going to be a great couple of days.
Yeah, I think it's going to be terrific for Joe to get his and I hate this phrase that kids use, get his flowers this July. But if anybody deserves it, both for
I'll bring them. There we go. Joe up.
Yeah, if anybody deserves it, it's certainly Joe Castiglione, your partner. Will, it's been great talking baseball with you, talking broadcasting. We'll have to do it again. We appreciate you giving us the time, and we'll see you at the ballpark later today.
My pleasure, Sean. Thanks so much. I'm happy to give you your flowers anytime.
Our thanks to Will Flemming of WEEI and the Red Sox Radio Network for joining us. We will be back later in the week. Chris Cotillo will join me, and we'll wrap up the Red Sox homestand, and the team prepares for another road trip. Seems like they just got home, and they're going back on the road to St. Louis and Tampa Bay. Chris will have you covered on the road. We will have you covered at MassLive, and a great way to be further covered is to be part of the Red Sox Insider text program here. All you have to do that is text the word JOIN to 617-751-6257, then click the link to subscribe. You get a free 14-day trial period at no cost. We think you'll like it so much that you will be super okay with paying an additional $4.99 per month after that.